Welcome back, AMFishers. I'm Bill Georgopoulos, the host of the AMFisH fishing vlog series. Shooting a little video today on the differences and being able to tell the differences between swim jigs and flipping jigs. This is a video I wanted to shoot. Sometimes, most of the time, not sometimes, most of the time I shoot my videos in my boat. But I thought I'd take an opportunity to shoot a few at home, just on a little table. Gives you a little better perspective of what I'm actually talking about. And I can actually zoom in a little bit better as well. So, on to the video. Swim jigs and flipping jigs. As you can see, I'll get a good look here on this table. I've got some of the packages and I've got a bunch here in front of me. And, you know, besides the color, they all look the same. To most of us, you know, especially if you're not very familiar with these are very amazing bass jigs and bass baits in general. But it's hard to tell the differences. Again, they've got a skirt, they've got a weed guard, a rattle chamber, and a hook and a jig head. But what's, you know, if you were just to look at these right now as I'm panning around side to side, who's going to be able to tell the differences unless you actually know those differences? So I thought I'd pass some tips and some other little key points in this video on to all of you to help you be able to decipher them, so then you can match the application and the bait to what you're doing. Standard flipping jig. I'm going to move a few of these out of the way so I can get a good view. This here is a standard flipping jig. Nothing special with the head. This is just kind of like a bell, almost like a somewhat of a bell, ovalish type head. Again, nothing very standard with that. It's just, this is a standard flipping jig head. They come circular. A few of them will come a little off shaped like this one here. And you'll find some that are more pointed, and you can see the differences. Let me hold all three so you can see the differences. So those are the differences on the generic, just a standard flipping jig. It's got its weed guard. For those of you who don't know what the weed guard is, this here is the weed guard, just a bunch of strands of plastic. And that is to protect weeds from snagging on your hook. It's got a skirt and a rattle chamber that's built on. So most of them have this on there. Very few don't nowadays. So if you ever do find some that don't, pick them up, because it's actually a good little silent bait. You know, that rattle is great in a lot of these baits, but sometimes you want to be in there with more of a silent presentation. And they can be removed. Other ones, like this one here, this one here just has these little rattle chambers, and they're actually just put on with a little elastic. You can buy them separately and put them on there as well, so you can actually take them off should you want a silent bait. But the main difference is with a flipping jig, again, it's the style of head. It's not decorated. It doesn't have any eyes, any of that stuff on it. It's just very generic. The weed guard is a pretty hefty weed guard, pretty thick, quite a few strands. Not super tough, but it's there. It's going to do the job, protect those weeds. And one of the key differences from a flipping jig and a swim jig is the hook. As you can see, that's a pretty thick hook right there. I'm going to grab a swim jig just to show you the difference. Put them side by side if I can get this little strand out of there. There's a pretty decent difference between those two hooks there. I'll go grab another swim jig that I have here. This is a red hook, just to give you another little different perspective. But this hook, again, on the flipping jig is much stronger, bigger, and it's basically made like that for the application. These jigs are fished in very thick cover, thick, dense weeds, sunken trees, branches, stumps, you name it, docks, boathouses. You can fish these there, and that's the whole thing. They've got a very strong pull torque on that hook, and that's because you're going to be setting the hook in a lot of cover. You might be pulling a 5, 8, 10 pound bass out of a bunch of weeds and thick structure. So you're going to need a very thick hook, strong hook, and a durable bait. Again, this is the standard flipping jig, and that's just one of the standard type heads. Another flipping jig, again, it's a standard flipping jig. It's got everything else. Again, another strong hook. This has a slightly different head on it. The weed guard's there. But again, it's made to be fished in thick, dense cover. The only difference is on the flipping jig heads. Like I said, you might get one that's that size there in that kind of a shape. You may get one that's a little rounder. You might get a really small round one, like this one here, which is a very small jig head. You could get one that's more of a torpedo-ish style like this, like a bell as well. Very lean and very sleek. And I'll show you one more of those in a smaller version. There's another one that's smaller, but leaner style. These leaner style ones, let me just move a few of these out of the way. These actually stand up as well. Hopefully I can make this happen because the skirt's there, but it typically stands up. It's got a little flat bottom to it, so it can stand up like this on the bottom of the lake. This one might be the better one to use for that demonstration if I get all the skirt out of the way. So yeah, it'll stand up like that. That's it, standing up right there. And it's just because it's got a little flat edge on the bottom. But these ones, anything in that torpedo style, even this small one here, and again this leaner one here, these will pass through very thick, dense weeds a lot easier than something like this, which is the bigger, chunkier style. This may get hung up a little bit more. Again, it's not a very aerodynamic head. Therefore, this is pretty much used. It's a lot easier with a round head example to flip this and skip it across the surface of the water. You know, drop it into pockets just by bouncing it off the surface of the water. This is better for that application, a rounder head. And these torpedo style heads here, like this one here, will sink a little bit easier through thick, dense weed because they are more aerodynamic. But that's what you're going to, that's how you're going to be able to decipher a flipping jig. Strong hook, heads are not really made any way, you know, with eyes or gill plates or specific colors. But that's what you're going to look for in this group here, which is a standard group of flipping jigs. When you look at more swim jigs, not swim baits, you'll find more like this, where they've got an eye, a pronounced eye on each side, so it's made to look like a little minnow's head. The color schemes there, some may have little scales on them or gill plates put into them. The weed guard is not going to be as thick. Let me pull one of the flipping jigs next to you. So it's not going to be as strong. It's pretty much the same, but it doesn't necessarily need to be as dense as this one here. The hook is going to be a lot more pliable because, again, it's just made to be used like a crankbait of some sort. The rattle chamber's on there, the skirt, everything else looks the same, but it's not designed for thick cover. So using something like this in very dense weed is just probably going to get hung up a lot. If you end up landing a really big fish or hooking into a really big fish, you got to pull it out of tight cover. It may pop off the hook. Your hook may get stuck in an obstruction as well on a edge of a rock or a stump and break in half. So the stronger hooks obviously come with the flipping jig because that's what it's designed for. It's designed for the thick cover. Another style of swim jig, and again it's very similar to the ones I showed you over here. I'll grab one of those again. These arrow leaner ones, I kind of have in a middle group. You know, if some are made, flipping jigs are made with really strong, thick hooks, and they have that style of head on them, and that again is just to get through all the cover easier. But I kind of have these in the middle group. If I'm reading the package, most of the packages will say flipping jig, swim jig, something like that. Some are very generic. They just say, jig on them. So that's where you kind of get stuck on deciphering what's what. But these, for me, tend to fall more into the swim jig category, depending on the hook and depending how strong everything else is made. So I use these, again, as swim jigs, as flipping jigs, maybe not in the real dense stuff. Another style of swim jig head is this one here. It's kind of like an arrow. As you can see that one on camera. And this is kind of designed, like I said, it'll sit like that. But swim jigs in general are meant to be fished in open areas around, around the weeds, around the weed lines, not in the thick, dense cover. And it's pretty much just a kind of, a jig retrieve back. You can use a steady retrieve like a crankbait. That's what those are designed for. You would tip these with a swim bait, a soft plastic worm, a swim bait, maybe even just again a creature bait or a crayfish. Flipping jigs are interpreted by fish as a crayfish. It sits like this in the bottom. All the skirt is flailing around, and you'll put a creature bait or a crayfish bait on the back. And when it sits like that, it resembles a crayfish. So this is a finesse style bait. You don't necessarily retrieve this back to the boat. You cast this out, you'll flip it into pockets, you'll flip it around structure. And as it sits there, you'll pop it a few times off the bottom, make it just jiggle a bit, make that soft plastic jiggle a bit, and then the fish strikes. So these fall into that slow presentation. You can swim these back. Again, I've used them as swim jigs, just casting them in open areas of water. They'll do the exact same thing as a swim jig. But again, everything's designed for a specific application. So something that I know I don't need a really thick hook with, and I know the round head on these ones may not be the best for swimming back to the boat. So I would go to something like this, or a leaner head, or if I want to actually try and really match a hatch to a bait fish, I'll use something like that that has the eye on it and the scales and the whole deal. So that's pretty much a little list there of all the differences between swim jigs and flipping jigs. Again, just panning back and forth, they all look the same to the naked eye when you look at them, unless you have that understanding. You may grab one like this with a thin hook on it and try and use this style in thick, dense weeds, and be telling a buddy, hey man, I tried those jigs and they're terrible. I'm always getting hung up on weeds. So you want to be very careful with what you're selecting there, and understanding that you're selecting the one it's going to do the job. Most of them, again, very generically, will say a jig on it, a model jig, a pro jig, a flipping jig. I haven't seen many packages that actually will say swim bait or swim jig or flipping jig, or it might say bass jig, but they come in different sizes as well: 3/4 inch, 3/4 ounce, half ounce, 3/8 ounce. That's the size of the head. So just an example I will use with a smaller one. This smaller jig style head here is going to be a lot lighter than the heavier, obviously the larger size jig head. And those applications come into play as well. You'll want a few different sizes for different presentations. If I'm in 12 feet of water, this one here, that's probably 3/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce, will sink a lot faster than something like this. It'll just, it's got the weight, and it'll displace water a lot quicker, and it'll sink a lot faster than a smaller jig head. To give you kind of a ratio, this 3/8 ounce, 3/4 ounce jig head will sink probably, let's say if it sinks, a second or 2 seconds every foot. This one may sink, 6 inches every second or so, because it's significantly lighter, and it's going to fall a lot slower than this. And that comes into play where you're out there fishing and you notice you're using the heavier style and it's sinking down, and you get a bunch of strikes, and all of a sudden the strikes stop. That's where you're going to want to tweak it, maybe change the bait up a bit, and I can talk about that in a second. But maybe change the bait up a bit, or go to a smaller, same color. You can go to the same color, just use a different size head, maybe even that size head, just to change it up. Now it's falling different, the fish see it differently, and they may start reacting and they come back onto the bite. When it comes to tweaking these, I'm going to move some of these out of the way so I don't get them all tangled up in the middle of this video. It's not too complex when it comes to tweaking these. There's the bait itself. I do encourage everyone to understand how the skirt works, so I'll do a very quick little cap of that. There's an upper and lower part of the skirt. These are replaceable. There's a little elastic band in there, and it just slides back up over the hook, and you can put these on. You can buy these, and they pretty much look like this in the package when you get the skirts. They're just assorted like that. So that's the upper half. This is the lower half. If I find there's way too much skirt on here and the bait is too bulky, I can cut off a bunch of these strands, just cut them off, cut them off with a knife or a pair of scissors, and I can cut off some here and make it leaner. If I want to make this into a finesse jig, I can also cut off the majority of this and just leave little a little portion, maybe that much above the jig head, and that'll just flail out like this on top, and that gives you more of a finesse bait. But you can see it's a pretty bulky skirt. It's a pretty big bait you put on a creature bait, and it adds a lot more size to that. So sometimes you'll want a leaner profile. Maybe you'll want to take off, you know, all that skirt there, just group it if I can, and leave a thinner style and get rid of all that, just cut it off. And you'll want to tweak some of these, again, to what the fish will tell you, always tell you what they're into. If they've been hitting something big and bulky like this, that's not a problem. If they stop hitting it, that's where you have to do a little bit of analyzing that day to figure out what they're going to hit and why they stopped hitting a specific bait. But you can tweak these. Again, it's just rubber, and I have you know, anywhere from 10 to 20 of these at a time. My standard color, obviously here in Canada, is black and blue flake, and I just match the hatch. So that's another little tip there as well. If you're using a white, use a white trailer. If you're using a mixed color like this, which is red, some green, pumpkin-y, and black, you'll try and match a creature to that, maybe like a solid black, maybe a black with some gold, or black with red flake or something like that. And then if you're getting into these, which is more of a pumpkin style, pumpkin green, I'd go to like a green or a pumpkin green, or maybe again a black. So you're trying to kind of match it as close you can to the skirt. There wouldn't be much point for me to be putting a white one on this, a white trailer on this soft plastic trailer, unless it's just something out of the box that I'm doing and all of a sudden the fish start hitting it. But usually you match the hatch with these, and again, they're very versatile. They let you fish a lot of styles on the water. You can fish them in the open water columns, on drop-offs. They're fantastic on drop-offs. You find yourself a good area of 6 to 7, 8 feet that drops down to 10 to 15 feet. Cast them out there and just let, you know, either work them down that ledge, or just cast them out, let them sink slowly down the bottom. But they are fantastic baits. It's just understanding the differences between a flipping jig, which is a more durable jig. It's made a lot more efficient and effective in that thick, dense cover and structure. And then a swim jig, which is basically just a jig that you're going to swim back to the boat around those areas. You're not necessarily going to flip that into that thick cover. To show you something as well on the weed guard, standard weed guard. This is one right out of the package, and that's a standard weed guard. I find them a little too long sometimes. Some of them are even longer. So what I'll do is I'll cut that down. I can show you. You can do it with scissors or side cutters. So there's a pair of scissors. Here's just a little pair of side cutters. Either one works fine. I just kind of level it off with the hook. I try and level it off as best I can with the hook, and I would just take the side cutters and maybe just cut this little triangle off right here. Doesn't need to be much. I just make that snip right across there, and what it does is, I'll show you on one that's actually cut, and I can show you the difference. Just move my cutters out of the way. That's kind of what it looks like after it's been cut. So it's just been cut on an angle, and you can clearly see that's the difference. So this one comes up a lot higher. I would leave a few like this if you're fishing around very stumpy, sunken tree areas, branches, stuff like that. You're going to want as much coverage as you can get. In most instances, I will cut it down because I just find that it doesn't make it that much tougher or stronger. It's still, you know, pretty pliable, just like this one is. But I like it being a little closer to the hook, and why I do that, and what I mean by it is, it doesn't take much. Bite down. So if a fish hits lightly, I'll still get it. You may get a little more weed hang up on this potentially. There's still some options to alleviate that happening, but again, I just snip it off, and I have some that are snipped and I have some that are left to the full length. It's just a preference thing. But another little tip here is, when they come out of a package, that's pretty much the coverage you get. That's what they look like out of the package. I like to flail them, and what I would do is flail them open, and I'll do this one here on both sides. As you can see, I'm probably getting a good view of that on camera. I have flailed that open to the point where I'm getting a good coverage now. I've got about 1 centimeter coverage over my hook. Now, what that does is, if I'm pulling through weeds, as you can see as I'm rubbing my finger across there, running it across, still leaves good coverage, still good protection, but it's actually a little bit better protection now on the sides. You can actually flail this and keep flailing them and have a few like this, maybe up even to an inch. Just have them out as far as you can. Now, what that does, again, it's just building like a little shield, right? And all that's doing is allowing everything to bounce off before it gets to the hook. It may compromise a little bit of the center strength. I've never found it to. I just, like I said, there's a lot of coverage there, right? So I'm still, fish bites down, I still have it. But now I've built this little shield. I can make it even wider if I want to. And I've gone from, a millimeter wide to a centimeter, almost to an inch if I want to. And again, it's just experimenting with these. Sometimes, like I said, in not so thick weed, I like to be able to hook the fish as fast as I can. And I find that if I flail it out a bit, it just passes by the hook a lot easier. And the fish may not feel, let me just grab one again with the standard one that hasn't been flailed open. Show you the differences. There's a difference there, right? So you'll see this one's very streamlined. That's right out of the package. That's what it looks like. And now I flailed it. And the hook coverage, as you can see, is a lot better on this one here. Again, if their fish are on a finicky bite and they bite down and they feel that, it could compromise the fish letting go. Doesn't happen that often, but again, just keep that in mind. You can just experiment with these. And just because let me take this one back. Just because I flailed this one out doesn't mean it has to stay flailed out. If you just grab those plastic strands and turn them around several times and hold them, eventually they'll find their path back to being somewhat normal to how it came out of the package. But that's just another little tip there. Again, you want to cut some down, have a few cut down, that's fine. There's swim jigs on this one here I'll use as an example. I've cut this one down way down, because I always fish this one in open water, and as you can see, it's pretty leveled with the hook. So I just want the fish to kind of react. I mean, these are something that'll swim back to the boat in a popping motion or just a slow retrieve, jigging it off the bottom in a jigging motion. And I want to trigger that strike that I get on a crankbait, and I don't necessarily need a lot of protection because I'm fishing it on a sandbar or sandy area, sandy bottom, mud bottom, near some structure, but around it, not necessarily in it. So I'm not so much worried about the hookup and the protection there. There may be instances where you just cut the whole thing off. You just don't need it, and you use them in certain areas as crankbaits. But that, in a long nutshell, not a short nutshell, is the differences between swim jigs and flipping jigs. As you can see, I have a bunch here. I probably have at any given time 10 to 12 with me for various applications. And they, it just doesn't matter what brand you get. I get what I can afford and what I find that I like the color schemes and works well for me. So hopefully you found this this video helpful, and you can decipher these now when you get out there into the stores and take a look. Again, flipping jigs are fantastic baits for bass. You can tweak them a hell of a lot just by manipulating the skirt or adding different colors. You can dye these as well. Some of them you can get, you can get a chartreuse pen that they sell, a marker that they sell in the store, or just a can of a little jar of dye, and dye the tips chartreuse if you want, or red. There's a lot of little tweaks that you can do as a fisherman just to try and stay on top of the fish. They do adapt to baits over time of using them, and sometimes you will want to come up with something different just to be different from the guy next to you in the boat. But again, that's the differences between swim jigs and flipping jigs. Hope you found the video helpful. Should you be interested in more fishing videos or have any questions, feel free to contact me through my website at amfish.ca. And if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do that through my website as well. Lots of informative videos on there with respect to fishing topics. And I just, sharing everything I know and I've learned over the last 20 some odd years with everyone out there through a video blog, in hopes that you have some increased success out on the water. So thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.